Hey y'all, welcome to the channel. Today we're checking out why rugby is based on a lie. Probably.
Did you know that rugby evolved from football? Today, the difference between the two sports is so dramatic that you might never know. But the story isn't actually as straightforward as many people think.
What do I know? I don't know a lot about rugby. I did a bunch of reaction videos about rugby when the World Championship, and that's not what it's called, I don't think. What was it called? Is it the World Cup of Rugby? Yeah, the Rugby World Cup. Of course. Yeah, that's what it's called. I knew that. Anyway, you can see that I don't really know a lot about it, but I am impressed by the athleticism, the roughness of it, and the fact that people don't really get hurt as much as American football, even though they're not wearing any pads. It's impressive and surprising and pretty fun to watch. I think it started in a place called Rugby. That's why it's called Rugby. Is that right? This will be a good refresher, and apparently I was lied to in those other videos. And this is going to set the record straight, y'all.
In England in the 1800s, football existed in many different forms and in different parts of society. For instance, even between the different English public schools, the rules tended to vary. Eton had a version, so did Harrow, and so on.
Okay.
Rugby School in Warwickshire had its own interpretation of the game also.
Okay,
In 1823, that version of football bore little relation to the game we know today, so much so that handling the ball was actually allowed. As long as the ball was airborne, a player could catch it, place it, and then kick it at goal. They just couldn't move after catching it or run with the ball in their hands. And this is where the legend begins. Attending rugby school at the time was a boy called William Webb Ellis, who was 16 when, during a game of football, he caught a ball and started running with it, which was very much against the rules. This is often presented as the game's eureka moment.
But it was
At
fun.
rugby school today, Webb Ellis is even commemorated by a statue, which shows him running and carrying a football. And there's a plaque at the school too, which reads, "This stone commemorates the exploit of William Webb Ellis,
A cheater.
who, with a fine disregard for the rules of football, as played in his time, first took the ball in his arms and ran with it, thus originating the distinctive feature of the rugby game."
Wow. Surely before that, someone ran with the ball, broke the rule, right? As they're learning the game, they would do that instinctually. Old Bill Ellis, y'all. What's his story? English-American clergyman. So this went on for at least 20 years and no one ran with the ball. Why was this time so different? Oh. Although the story has become firmly entrenched in the sports folklore, it is not supported by first-hand evidence and is discounted by most rugby historians as a myth. Is this the lie he's talking about? He was born in blah, 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 blah. Oh, this story came about in 1876, 50 years later. A boy named Ellis, whilst playing big side at football in a half year, whatever that means, caught the ball in his arms. This being so, according to the then rules, he ought to have been retired back as far as he pleased without parting with the ball, for the combatants on the opposite side could only advance to the spot where he had caught the ball and were unable to rush forward till he had either punted it or had placed it for someone else to kick. For it was by means of these placed kicks that most of the goals were in those days kicked. But the moment the ball touched the ground, the opposite side might rush on. Was this written by King James? Because it reads like a Bible. Ellis, for the first time, disregarded this rule, and on catching the ball, instead of retiring backwards, rushed forward with the ball in his hands towards the opposite goal, with what result as to the game I know not. What? Stop. What? Neither do I know how this infringement of a well-known rule was followed up, or when it became, as it is now, a standing rule. Bloxham's first account differed from his second one 4 years later. In his first letter in 1876, Bloxham claimed that Webb Ellis committed the act in 1824, a time by which Webb Ellis had left rugby. In his second letter in 1880, Bloxham put the year at 1823. Liar! I guess that's what the video's about. I don't want to read ahead of the video, but apparently this is all bullshit. Lies about rugby. Why would you lie about this? What town is this guy in? Was this in Rugby? 1823. Okay, let's back up a bit.
Attending rugby school at the time was a boy called William Webb Ellis, who was 16 when, during a game of football, he caught a ball and started running with it, which was very much against the rules. This is often presented as the game's eureka moment. At rugby school today, Webb Ellis is even commemorated by a statue, which shows him running and carrying a football. And there's a plaque at the school too, which reads, "This stone commemorates the exploit of William Webb Ellis, who, with a fine disregard for the rules of football, as played in his time, first took the ball in his arms and ran with it,
These are
thus
backwards.
originating the distinctive feature of the rugby game. Rugby, the place, is entwined with rugby, the game. The first rugby balls were also manufactured nearby. Richard Linden and William Gilbert each had shops on Rugby High Street and supplied the school with hand-stitched balls from 3 panels of leather and a pig's bladder. To this day, Gilbert Rugby remains one of the biggest manufacturers in the game, and a supplier of the rugby balls used in many major club and international competitions.
It's still around making balls?
And the game supposedly grew from there, fanning out from rugby and following a familiar pattern. The first set of rules was written in 1845 by pupils at the school. The convention of running with the ball grew over the next few decades. Clubs started to spring up across England in the 1870s and, as with football, began to appear in British colonies too. It reached the United States in 1870, and the first international match, contested between England and Scotland, was played in 1871. There were 20 players on each side. The game featured 2 halves of 50 minutes each, and Scotland won by a single point, in front of 4,000 spectators at Rayburn Place in Edinburgh.
That's a crap game. What a boring, low-scoring game. Must have sucked. I mean, maybe at the time that was normal. Okay, moving on.
Now, it's a fine and a neat tale, but it's possibly also misleading, at least in the sense that a simple act of catching and running with a ball probably didn't begin an entirely new sport, as has become law. One of the interesting quirks of William Webb Ellis's life is that while he was alive, he was never celebrated as rugby's creator. He died in 1872, having attended Oxford University and later working as a clergyman. His part in the game's founding myth was airbrushed around him decades after he passed. Fast forward to 1895, when rugby's popularity was growing and members of the old Rugbyian Society, a group of alumni, set up a private investigation to establish the true roots of the game. Their focus was an essay, written in 1880, by an old rugby student who made reference to the Webb Ellis incident. The Society interviewed surviving pupils, a few with first or second-hand knowledge of Webb Ellis the boy, and yet, according to Phil McGowan, curator at the World Rugby Museum, 1 or 2 of the respondents could recall Webb Ellis the pupil, and one even recalled him being inclined to take unfair advantages of football. However, not one of those contacted recollected the famous act of 1823, nor heard any talk of it during their time at the school. There was also no consensus reached on whether, as the Webb Ellis story suggests, carrying the ball did catch on quickly in the 1820s or 1830s. Several contemporary witness accounts suggested otherwise. Despite that, the investigation concluded that carrying the ball, rugby's most basic principle and its biggest distinguishing feature from football, in all probability did start with Webb Ellis in 1823. And it was shortly after that that the statue and the plaque were installed at Rugby School, announcing it as the home of the sport.
This is the start of the lie, is what he's saying. And then they built the statue. What? Oh my God. It's like an angry old woman.
In A Game for Hooligans, A History of Rugby Union, the author Hugh Richards wrote that it seems odd that if Webb Ellis did play the pivotal role of legend, there's no record of his ever expressing an interest or claiming reflected glory, since he lived long enough to see his school's pastime become an adult sport. Later in his book, when discussing the true origins of rugby, Richards cites examples of similar ball games played in medieval Ireland and even ancient Rome, before writing that nobody invents games as...
That animation just made me laugh. I'm going to watch it again.
When discussing the true origins of...
It has a Monty Python kind of vibe.
Rugby, Richards cites examples of similar ball games played in medieval Ireland and even ancient Rome, before writing that nobody invents games as elemental as kicking and running with a ball. They doubtless date back to the first time somebody discovered it was possible to inflate a pig's bladder, or that anything round or dense can be thrown accurately. So it's impossible to know for sure. Like football, the origins of rugby were likely gathered from all sorts of places, and combined in different ways at different points in history, including, most definitely, at Rugby School in the first half of the 1800s, just not perhaps in quite such a neat or dramatic way. Nevertheless, Rugby Union's World Cup, which has been played since 1987 and is contested every 4 years, rewards the winning nation with a trophy named after William Webb Ellis.
So it's kind of like a convenient parable. It's like George Washington chopping down the cherry tree. It's like Abraham Lincoln building a log cabin. Like, did it really happen? It's a good story. Here's a different angle of the statue, and I have to say, the tilt of the statue is impressive. Whoever made that. Alternative theories One theory is that Webb Ellis was playing the ancient Irish game Cade, which was similar to rugby. His father may have been familiar with this game as he had been stationed in Ireland as a soldier with the Dragoons. Okay, so he may have been playing a different game. Okay, I don't see how that fits in, but okay. Jim Mackey. An article by Gordon Rayner in the Sunday Telegraph about the origin of rugby football says that Thomas Hughes told the 1895 investigation that in 1838-1839, a rugby schoolboy called Jim Mackey was the first great runner-in, and that later, in or before 1842, Jim Mackey was expelled from rugby school for an unspecified incident. In 1845, boys at the school first wrote down an agreed set of rules for the version of football played at rugby school, which is now rugby football. Gordon Rayner said that the reason for Jim Mackey's expulsion may have damaged Mackey's reputation so much that Bloxham transferred Mackey's part in inventing rugby football to Webb Ellis, and that a big donation by Bloxham to Rugby School Library may have influenced school official acceptance of this Webb Ellis version. That makes sense because if Webb Ellis became a clergyman, like, that's morally correct, or it was at the time. He's probably doing some shady stuff. Another theory is that Mackey's role may have been disregarded because the committee was seeking to prove rugby school had invented the game and thus may have preferred the earliest possible date. England Rugby says that William Webb Ellis's action, if it happened, did not lead to any immediate change in the rules, but may have well inspired later imitators, though not Mackey. As Thomas Hughes said, the Webb Ellis story had not survived into its own time. Okay. So it could be that the rugby school wanted to take credit for inventing the game, so they made it be like, oh yeah, there's this kid here 60, 80 years ago who started rugby. Yeah, it's us. We did it. What did Jim Mackey do? Oh, Jim Mackey was also a British Liberal Party and Whig politician, so maybe it was a political reason. Maybe the Conservatives of the time. Wait, what is that Whig Party? Is that liberal? Wait, is it the same? Okay, so he was a liberal. The Whigs were liberals. So maybe the Conservatives of the time cooked up a lie. That's what they do. Not to get political, but politicians lie, y'all. They lie. He was elected Whig MP for Kirkcudbrightshire in 1857, and he died 10 years later. How did he die? Was he killed? I bet he was murdered. This liberal kid started rugby. When he graduated, he became a politician. The Conservatives said, hey, no, we need what priests do we have that went to the rugby school? William Ellis. What was his name? I don't even remember. Webb Ellis. William Webb Ellis, a great candidate for a conservative party to promote politics and religion. See, it should be separate, y'all. This is causing problems. They're rewriting history. We need to change the name on that trophy to Jim Mackey. Mr. Mackey, sir, thank you for inventing a game. Sorry you got discredited. Sorry you're dead. But thank you. We're a great sport. Thanks for running with the ball. Thanks for breaking the rules. You know? Pick the ball up with your hands and run in a football game. Who does that? Why was he not called out? He probably did it with such conviction and confidence and earnest conviction that the ref was like, yeah, okay, score. Goal for you, Mackey. Well, this was an interesting video. We get lied to all the time, y'all. So many lies in history because the losers are usually dead. Anyway, thank y'all for watching this with me, and I'll see you next time. Later.